The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television. Good afternoon, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Biden's cognitive issues can no longer be ignored.
To speak about the man who most likely will challenge President Donald Trump at the coming US presidential election, Joe Biden, who overnight gave a speech laying out his plans to overcome coronavirus and to condemn Trump for the spread of the virus in the US. Despite the fact that when the president closed the US's borders to non-citizens travelling from China, Biden was among those critical of the move. Remember those cries of racism when the US and Australia were among the first countries to restrict travel from China? A move that medical experts say was critical in reducing the spread of the virus to those countries. Biden refused to take any questions after reading his short statement off an auto cue. In recent months, we've seen Biden appear confused about key facts, policies, dates, and names. He even at one point forgot Barack Obama's name. The Democrats' Biden or bust strategy has seen the former vice president become the clear frontrunner to be their presidential candidate. But no matter how hard the Democrats and their allies in the media try, Biden's cognitive issues can no longer be ignored or blamed on some right-wing conspiracy. There is simply too much footage of his muddled rants, inexplicably bizarre outbursts, and Charlie Sheen levels of confusion to try to gaslight the American public. Biden has appeared frail, perplexed, and just odd on too many public occasions, so much so that his campaign workers have been accused of elder abuse for wheeling him out weekend at Bernie style. This week, Biden launched an astonishing attack against a blue-collar worker in Michigan who questioned his proposed gun laws. Not only did Biden get basic facts wrong and misstate his own policy, but he told the constituent in a hard hat he was full of shit and a horse's behind, and got aggressively in the man's face to the point where the voter said, "This is not okay." Have a look at Biden's response.
Wait. Take your AR-14s and what?
Okay, this is
AR-14.
All right. And let's there's a lot of guys wanted.
It's hard to make out, but he pretty much said, "Don't tell me that, pal. Don't tell me it's not okay. I'm going to go out and slap you in the face." When journalists asked him about that spat and why he swore at a union worker, Biden seemed genuinely confused and said,
Both targeting over this exchange this morning with the voter about guns. Any impressed about how you handled it?
Well, I'm surprised that Sanders is joining Trump. It's just surprising.
Wasn't it appropriate to swear at an American, though, especially a union voter?
That's the man who much of the media claim is best equipped to bring civility and honour back to the White House. Here's a man who's developed a habit for abusing voters. It's an odd strategy, given the Democrats desperately need middle America. You know, the people who voted twice for Obama before switching to Trump, to swing back to them. Last month, Biden called a woman a lying, dog-faced pony soldier after she asked a mild question, and he even challenged an Iowa voter to a push-up contest and an IQ test. Biden's gaffes, episodes of confusion and bizarro comments are becoming all too common on the campaign trail. I'm not even talking about his hair-sniffing antics.
Look, tomorrow's Superstar Tuesday, and I want to thank you all. I tell you what, I'm rushing ahead, aren't I? 150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. It would put 720 million women back in the workforce. Nobody should be in jail for a nonviolent crime. My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. What's not to like about Vermont in terms of the beauty of it? And what a neat town. Play the radio. Make sure make sure you have the record player on at night. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Yeah.
But there's more. There's always more.
Things I'm proudest of is getting passed, getting moved, getting control of the Paris Climate Accord. I'm the guy that came back after meeting with Deng Xiaoping and making the case that I believe China would join if we put pressure on them. You had people like you had people like the former chairman and leader of the party in Germany. Go to Joe 3033.
Biden's decline has been evident for some years. Back in 2017, at a swimming pool in Delaware, the pool was being renamed in his honour, he gave perhaps the most bizarre speech ever by a mainstream politician. Have a look.
I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun, and the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap.
Oh, it's the same thing,
and
right?
I love kids jumping on my
It's little wonder Biden's team is trying to restrict his time in front of microphones. Some of his recent speeches at rallies have been as short as 7 minutes. Meanwhile, Trump regularly talks off the cuff for 90 minutes at rallies, cracking jokes, trolling his rivals, and occasionally talking policy. Of course, Biden can still beat Trump, though that may look unlikely 8 months out. But Biden has two great assets: the bulk of the media, who are sadly so afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome that they'd find a way to condemn him, even if he found a cure for coronavirus. And Biden's other great asset is that he's not Hillary Clinton.
And Sky News Australia is not the only outlet in a foreign country to notice Biden's cognitive decline, nor the only one to notice how U.S. media are firmly up the butt cheeks of Biden, whereas other countries are still trying to figure out why Biden? Why have you put all of your eggs in that basket? This is from the Japan Times. Biden obviously has dementia and should withdraw from the race. The Democrats ought to be ashamed of themselves. They spent the last 4 years criticizing Donald Trump in no small part for his mental state, and rightly so. The Founding Fathers included an impeachment provision in the Constitution in large part as a contingency to remove a president exactly like him, whose temperament and personality and mental state are incompatible with the requirements of the highest elected office in the land. Trump is not merely a jerk. Psychologists have been so alarmed that they have violated a core ethical principle of their profession by attempting to diagnose him from afar. Narcissistic personality disorder is their universal conclusion, and it fits like a glove. Among the characteristics of NPD is a lack of empathy, not something one wants or needs in a leader. Now, Democrats are conspiring to gaslight the American people by engineering the presidential election of a man clearly suffering from dementia, Joe Biden. This is no time to be polite. We are talking about the presidency. As always, we need a frank, intelligent discussion and debate about the issues and the candidates. It is perfectly fair to talk about Bernie Sanders' heart attack as well as Biden's and Trump's mental acuity. Contrary to current ridiculous Democratic talking points, it is not ageist to point this out. 1 out of 7 Americans over the age of 70 suffers from dementia. Biden is 77. If it's ageist to talk about dementia among the elderly, it's ageist to talk about immaturity among the young. It is neither necessary nor possible to scientifically determine whether the former vice president has dementia. On the other hand, you don't need an astronomer to know that the sun rises in the east. If you have encountered dementia, you know Biden has it. There is so much blame to go around for this BS that I can't figure out what order to put it in. I'll go chronologically. There are the Democratic Party bosses who, terrified at the prospect that Sanders might win the nomination, recruited former Vice President Joe Biden out of a comfortable retirement to run yet again. There is Biden himself. His family should have known better than to allow a campaign by the guy who inspired the headline, "Biden allies float scaling back events to limit gaffes." Not that gaffes are the issue, or stuttering, or being old. Many Americans are as old or older than Biden. They stutter and they're mentally competent. Biden is not. Of course, you also have to cast the stink eye at Biden's former rivals Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and Mike Bloomberg. Just because the DNC probably urged them to endorse Biden doesn't mean that they had to. No cabinet position or even a position as vice president should be enough inducement to set aside common sense. Elizabeth Warren earns an honorary mention for her failure to speak out against Biden and to endorse Sanders. Did I miss something? So here's my check on it. Elizabeth Warren is unlikely to endorse Bernie Sanders. Here's why, from the New York Times. Elizabeth Warren's refusal to endorse Bernie Sanders, from Business Insider, and Elizabeth Warren endorsement of Bernie Sanders no longer matters, poll shows Newsweek. So we can thank Elizabeth Warren both for failing to jump in last time when Bernie asked her, and then for running against Bernie this time in order to crowd the progressive lane. None of the media seem interested in the truth about Biden. Democratic media allies like CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, and the Washington Post are running interference for the Democratic establishment and Biden by failing to ask any questions about the candidate's mental fitness. Right-wing outlets like Fox News are gleefully trumpeting Biden's mental decline, but they would say that even if it wasn't true. The Fourth Estate has abdicated its duty to follow the truth wherever it leads. And finally, there are the voters. As a citizen, you have no business casting a vote thoughtlessly or less than fully informed. Deliberately casting a vote for someone clearly suffering from dementia or turning a blind eye to it or being simply unaware of Biden's mental state are inexcusable. I spent the last few years watching my mother's decline due to dementia caused by Alzheimer's. She had been brilliant. Years before her death, however, she was having a tough time keeping it together. I would have voted for her as president in 2012, but not in 2016. It would have been wrong. No one who has been close to someone deteriorating from that disease could fail to see the same signs in Biden. In online discussions, Biden apologists sometimes say that a senile Biden is better than an evil Trump. Is this really where we are? Consider the 20 or so contenders for the Democratic nomination as of late last year. All of them except for one, Biden, were mentally competent. Marianne Williamson came off as loopy and Tom Steyer was painfully awkward, but both were in full command of their faculties. The Democrats literally picked the worst of the bunch. This is not about politics. No doubt Biden's voting record is monstrous. He opposed school busing, sold out Anita Hill, voted to invade Afghanistan and Iraq, supported NAFTA, and bragged about the extrajudicial assassination of Osama bin Laden. And yes, Hunter Biden's job in Ukraine is classic corruption, but that's not the point here. Even if Biden's politics were closer to mine, quadrupling the minimum wage, nationalizing major industries, banning all wars of aggression, free healthcare and college, I would be writing this same column. It doesn't matter how crappy Trump is, it's anti-American and unpatriotic to vote for someone suffering from dementia for a position with exclusive control over nuclear launch codes. What about Trump? If Biden is the nominee and people don't vote for him, which I think will be the case anyway, Trump will win a second term. Isn't it imperative to stop that by any means necessary? As I wrote recently, odds are that Trump, like most previous presidents, won't get much done during his second term anyway. Anyway, there is always a moral alternative to picking between two terrible options. Vote for another party, write someone in, don't vote. But it's not too late for the Democrats. Biden doesn't have to be the nominee. He can and should withdraw. So the main point here is not the main point here, which is Biden's cognitive decline, but it's who's noticing it. The other countries in the world who stand much to gain by a Sanders presidency, as we all do because our planet won't be destroyed, but also much to lose under a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency, are all weighing in and trying to warn us. It's not because they hate us. It's not because they want to defeat us in battle. It's because all of us are in this together. The world is shrinking rapidly, and we all need to understand that we can't have someone leading the most powerful nation in the world who has dementia. Duh! Here's another example of when Biden should have microphones nowhere near him.
A U.S. veteran confronted Joe Biden on his support for the Iraq War. And this back and forth didn't go well. Joe got defensive, and the veteran obviously is, really hurt by what the political class had him and his friends do. So let's take a look and then we'll discuss.
I'm an Air Force veteran, Army veteran. We're just wondering why we should focus voted for a war in Israel. Thousands of our brothers and sisters. You also gave a medal to the man.
We should jump in here and let you know that he's going to mention his son who was killed. And this is unconscionable. He's saying, well, because my son was killed by my horrible decision, everything's okay. If you had another son, Joe, who was in the armed forces, would you vote not to have an imperialistic interventionist war in that country? I doubt it.
My friend's dead.
So was my son.
I'm sure it does. I'm not going after your son. I'm not. You were disqualified, sir. Disqualified. The blood is on our hands. Blood is on our hands. No. My brothers and sisters died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he enabled that to happen. He enabled that to happen. He is disqualified. He is disqualified. No way he can be president. They are dead. Millions are dead in Iraq. He will not be allowed to be president. Disqualified. Trump is more anti-American.
Fucking bullshit. Fucking imperialist. We actually fought in your damn wars. We fought in your wars. You sent us to hurt civilians. We hurt civilians. You pushed us out to do it.
Woo, that one was difficult to watch.
I don't think he understood that the cameraman was also yelling. So there were two people who were equally frustrated at Biden's policies.
All that dude is hurting. You could tell that, he's haunted by what happened in Iraq. And listen, of course you're going to be haunted. He said it. Listen, I lost friends. My brothers and sisters in uniform. I know many of them that died. And he's in pain. He's in pain. And you have the other one saying, you guys had us hurt civilians, man. And what did Joe Biden do when he was confronted with this? He got defensive, and he said, well, my son died too.
He said, well, you better not pick on my son, and then he turned and walked away. He just used that as a way to get the conversation to end, and I'm glad that guy didn't end it there. I'm glad he went on and his buddy and told the truth.
So, what has Joe Biden done in the year since? Take a look.
First of all, I actually like Dick Cheney for real. I get on with him. I think he's a decent man. I went to see him after we were elected, and I went to see him at the residence, and he and his wife were extremely gracious to Jill and to me. It probably sounds like I'm making this up when I say I learned from, but I spoke to this man repeatedly about this job. But he was extremely helpful and gracious about the office and the legal parameters of the office.
Here it says, awarding Bush the Liberty Medal for spreading freedom. Spreading freedom, 2018, for my listeners on podcast. It's interesting to hear him speaking in 2015. Even though he's saying heinous things in 2015, he's saying them with some lucidity.
There is no doubt who is responsible for this heinous use of chemical weapons in Syria. The Syrian regime. At President Obama's direction, all of us and his national security team have been in close touch with our foreign counterparts. The president believes, and I believe, that those who use chemical weapons against defenseless men, women, and children
They didn't.
should and must be held accountable.
And by the way, there have been whistleblowers in the wake of the chemical weapons attacks in Syria who've come out and said, they're not telling the truth about this.
Nope.
They're not telling the truth about this. The full story is not out. So we've been misled and lied to. Not too dissimilar from exactly what happened in the lead up to the Iraq war. Oh my God, Saddam Hussein. Oh my God, weapons of mass destruction. Oh my God, he's an imminent threat against us. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Just sit back and let him kill civilians? Oh my God, he's a brutal dictator. We got to topple him. Use the exact same arguments that were made against the Syrian government. Now, I'm not saying you have to, defend Assad and say he's a good dude or whatever the hell. No. But this is absolutely, positively none of our business. We are not the world police. We are not the moral center of the world. Every time we do regime change, there ends up being motivations that are selfish and that are for the military-industrial complex. And
that's the point of neoliberalism. It's selfish. It's trying to get everything at the expense of the worker for the sake of the oligarchs or the soldier. And that's Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a perfect example of a neoliberal corporate sock puppet. And not only that, he is mentally incompetent. And somebody should say this, even though he's incompetent doesn't mean that his agenda won't keep going forward. The CIA and the other deep state people will take him right in hand and make sure he gets to bed on time, make sure he doesn't speak more often than necessary, and they'll just keep running us through the imperial wars. They'll keep the money flowing away from the workers into the coffers of the rich. They'll exploit soldiers. They'll make sure our planet is destroyed. They'll make sure that disadvantaged people will continue to suffer. They won't enact Medicare for all. They won't forgive college debt. They won't make college free. There won't be subsidized daycare. There won't be an increase in participation from unions. There will be more pernicious trade agreements. We know what goes on under neoliberalism. Whether or not Joe is merely a mouthpiece or a puppet that they pull out when they need, we would be better off with a bloody revolution than 8 more years of neoliberalism. Can you imagine, though, trying to prop up Joe Biden for 8 years? Imagine what his brain is going to look like, a soggy pulp 8 years from now. Here's a Jacobin magazine article by Matt Karp. Bernie Sanders can still win the nomination and the presidency. Skipping ahead to the middle, and yet a race that utterly changes complexion in just one 72-hour period can perhaps utterly change complexion again. Last night, Super Tuesday, Biden was riding high on the drama of the last few days. The endorsements from Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and Harry Reid appear to have convinced many Democrats that a vote for Biden was a vote for safety and unity against chaos and division. But in the weeks ahead, safety and unity will not be on the ballot, the stump, or the debate stage. Instead, voters will have to reckon with Joe Biden himself, whose own obvious vulnerabilities can no longer be obscured by the tangle of a half-dozen competing candidates. The outlines of a potential Biden-Trump campaign will come closer into view, beginning with a dismal rehash of the politics of impeachment, centering on Hunter Biden, Burisma, and Ukraine. And Democrats will have a chance to take another look at Biden's remarkable 40-year political record of betraying American workers, from his calls for Social Security cuts, to his cheerleading for NAFTA, to his stalwart service to the predatory lending industry, and Biden's own mental capacity, under question all campaign long, will be tested in ways we have not yet witnessed. Will voters like what they see? The next few weeks will tell, but amid the wreckage of last night, there were a few reasons to believe that Bernie Sanders can still make an alternative case that many Democrats find persuasive. Everywhere Bernie's signature issues were on the ballot last night, they won. Medicare for all, described as a government plan instead of private insurance, earned decisive Democratic support in all 12 states where it was polled, from Alabama, 51% to 43%, to Texas, 64 to 33%. Free public college tuition won even more dominant majorities in all 5 states in which it was polled. Even socialism itself won landslide victories in Texas and California, a comfortable majority in North Carolina, and a plurality in Tennessee. Tens of thousands of Joe Biden socialists, we learned last night, walked the streets of Houston, Charlotte, and Nashville. No matter what conservative pundits may say, Democratic voters did not express any overriding fear or concern about Bernie Sanders' agenda last night. In fact, they endorsed it overwhelmingly. But in a primary campaign dominated from beginning to end by a desperate Democratic desire to beat Donald Trump, voters expressed a belief, perhaps durable, perhaps fleeting, that Biden is the best candidate to do that job. Sanders faces a hard road ahead. The post-Nevada mirage has vanished. In retrospect, probably we should have never let ourselves believe that this could be so easy. It was always going to be a fight. Yet, nor can we afford to wallow in despair. Last weekend, Democratic bosses decided almost overnight to place all their chips on Joe Biden. Last night, in a frantic lunge for safety, Democratic voters followed their lead. But in a bare-knuckled battle with Trump, does real safety belong with this candidate, whose name is a synonym for the swamp around Capitol Hill, whose political career is an extended advertisement for Beltway malfeasance, and whose only real asset, a kind of musty aura of the Obama years, is considerably diminished by his inability to speak in complete sentences? To make a competitive run at Biden, Sanders must convince voters that he is not just the better choice, he is the safer choice. It's not an impossible case to make, but after last night, he only has about 2 weeks to make it. Here's another Jacobin article by Branko Marcetic and Megan Day. Bernie Sanders can lead the fight against coronavirus, Joe Biden can't. I'll jump ahead in this one too. In many ways, Bernie Sanders was made for a moment like this. He understands the problems facing working class people in their day-to-day lives: medical uninsurance and underinsurance, inflexible or unreliable work schedules, lack of childcare, food insecurity, vulnerability to eviction, the absence of emergency funds. He talks about these pervasive realities in his stump speech. They are integral to the way he imagines the texture of American life and what he believes needs fixing. It's not difficult for him to call them to mind and account for them in a moment of crisis. And he's not a rookie at arguing for major public interventions to stop and prevent widespread devastation, regardless of the implications for corporate profits. In fact, the central demands that have propelled him from the margins to the mainstream, Medicare for all, tuition-free college and student debt cancellation, a Green New Deal, massive public housing investment, and a homes guarantee are of precisely that same nature. The measures this moment urgently calls for are echoes of the social democratic reforms for which Sanders has spent years, or in some cases decades, attempting to build support. A public health crisis of this magnitude is like a tracer die revealing the fractures in the system. It's never been more evident that health care in this country is inadequate and barbarically unequal, and that tens of millions of working class people in this country are living inches from financial ruin. It's never been clearer why the nation needs a political revolution of the type Bernie Sanders advocates. A recent headline in The Independent read, "Ironically enough, Bernie Sanders' policies could have saved us from coronavirus." But it doesn't have to be ironic, and they still can. If we're fortunate, this crisis will help millions understand that Biden's hostility to the creation of a real welfare state is unreasonable and literally deadly. Jumping ahead to the thrilling conclusion, Sunday's debate will be similar. In 2016, debating Hillary Clinton one-on-one in Flint, Michigan before pulling out a surprise victory in the Midwestern state, Sanders was able to use the format, as well as Clinton's own built-in conservatism, to appear forward-thinking and decisive while making Clinton look indecisive, wishy-washy, and overly cautious in a time of crisis. While Clinton received one round of applause for her answer to the question on restoring trust in government, Sanders received 4 separate sets of audience applause for an answer that was half the length. In other words, the debate went a lot like Biden and Sanders' dueling coronavirus press conferences, except unscripted and in real time. Clinton's reticence to call for bold public action, a product fittingly of the same political approach pioneered by Biden in the 1980s, worked against her in a time of crisis, while Sanders' more ambitious and strident demands perfectly fit the moment. Sunday's debate will be similar. It will be one-on-one, it will be conducted in the midst of crisis, and Sanders' opponent will be a similarly conservative Democrat allergic to government action. In this case, one who once admonished Democratic elder statesman Hubert Humphrey for not being cognizant of the limited, finite ability government has to deal with people's problems. Only this time, Sanders will be facing a rival who not only has a habit of forgetting his best friend's name and what office he's running for, but tends to give incoherent, rambling answers when deprived of a teleprompter. And this time, the crisis is affecting not one city, but the entire globe and its economy. Sunday's debate has the chance to reshape the race, but Sanders will need to take the gloves off. After all, there are bigger things at stake in this election than his friendship with Joe Biden. We'll conclude with some admonitions from Dr. Cornel West.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. You asking that kind of profound question, I got to stand up and straighten my back out. Brother Martin used to say, anytime, every day, people straighten their backs up, you're going somewhere, because folk can't ride your back unless it's bent. And I'm not allowing nobody to ride my back. Not at all. But I love you too. But you keep in mind, you see, that when you see me, you see my mama and daddy, you see in my tradition, my community. You see in Dee Dee Bridgewater from this town and a Betty Carter from this town. But you're also seeing some Michael Moore in me, because it's just not a skin pigmentation matter. Skin pigmentation doesn't determine your moral and spiritual formation. You got to decide who you are. And the reason why I'm with this brother, and I've been with this brother, and I will be with this brother, that's why Brother Danny Glover and I came yesterday and had 11 events in various senior citizen sites. That's why I'm going to be with him all the way through, is because we are experiencing a massive moral and spiritual collapse of integrity, honesty, and decency in the country. And I don't care what color you are, I don't care your gender, I don't care your sexual orientation, it is a moral and spiritual crisis. And this dear brother, my dear brother Bernie Sanders, exemplifies an integrity, honesty, and decency. Do you know how rare that is in the political class, when most of them are up for sale. They're up for sale. They tied to big money in all of its various forms. When they ask what are their deepest moral convictions, they got to ask what the latest poll is saying. You don't have to worry about that with this brother. He's never, ever up for sale. That's who he is. That's the kind of brother he is. Let's just be honest about it. That's right. And we're not saying that he's God. We're not saying he's a deity. You know, you say this and the corporate media will say, oh, he got a little cult of personality. It's clear that Brother West has a deep love for Brother Bernie Sanders. Yes, the love is real, but it's brother to brother. We here to be able to keep him accountable as he provides leadership and vision in a moment in which we're about to lose American democracy. We're about to lose it. When you're a neoliberal centrist, you can lip sing fairly well some of the progressive themes every 4 years. But like Milli Vanilli, we want the real thing. Bernie Sanders is the real thing. We want the real thing. Isn't that true, Sister Nina? We want the real thing. We're not degrading him as a human being. We're talking about the qualitative break because the neo-fascist now in the White House and the neoliberal who all of a sudden now is coming back to life. Coming back to life. And the catalyst was my own black people. Oh, I'm so disappointed. Oh, I'm so upset. I think about the legacy of Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells Barnett. I think about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. I think about the legacy of Ella Baker. I think about the legacy of A. Philip Randolph. They always said, focus on the least of these. What are you doing for the poor and working classes? There's no other campaign that represents that better than Bernie Sanders. No other one. No other one. Brother Bernie. That's right. So then, but then the question becomes, Why not the third option? And keep in mind, Brother Bernie's running on a progressive neo-populist platform. He and I are democratic socialists. It's not a democratic socialist platform. It's building on FDR. It's building on Martin Luther King Jr., who also was a Democratic, but he's not running on that. So all the lies about socialism and communism, keep track of the moral and spiritual spirit and fire of what Bernie is doing. Don't get caught in the isms. We're talking about the preciousness of poor and working people. But my last point is this. When it comes to the chocolate side of the country. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, I got a deep love for my black people. I wouldn't be standing here without black love, without my mom and my daddy in Shiloh Baptist Church and Willie P. Cook, my vacation Bible school teacher. And I say, what has happened that first black leadership itself has become so open to just money and status rather than bearing witness to a justice that makes them over against the status quo? Black people historically have always been the most progressive community in the history of this nation. 244 years of white supremacist slavery, 100 years of neo-slavery called Jim and Jane Crow. We've been on the cutting edge, but since the 1940s, since 40 years ago, all of a sudden we got a wave of black middle-class folk who think that somehow their access to opportunities is the measure of black progress rather than Precious, Shaniqua, and Jamal on the corner. So they didn't really zero in on the mass incarceration regime. They don't talk about the decrepit school systems in the hood. They don't talk about inadequate housing. They don't talk about not enough jobs with a living wage. They don't talk about the need for Medicare for everybody that's going to disproportionately help black people and brown people and red people. What has happened to our black leadership? Some of them just sold out. Other ones have just given up. And the rest of them, they so scared, they so addicted to the familiar, they don't want to step out on the best. They want to settle on the mediocre and the middling. I'm going with the best of America. I'm going with Bernie Sanders.
So if you're also going with the best, if you're going with Bernie Sanders, there's not much time left. We're either going to scare the comfortable Democrats into voting for him in the primaries, or we're going to have to go to Milwaukee. I'm already going to Milwaukee. We've got our reservations. We've got a few people going. Hope to meet up with you there too. It doesn't look as though we're going to get the nomination outright, so it looks like we're going to go have to explain some things to the people in Milwaukee. Bernie or bust can take on lots of different meanings, we've discovered. But one thing is for sure, we're not voting for Joe Biden in the general election. Let's scare people with that, but let's also scare them with our signs that we're waving and our voices that we're raising. Let's make sure that everyone knows that the time for revolution is not in 4 more years or 8 more years or 12 more years. The time for revolution is right now.
Get on board the Bernie or bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Go get on board the Bernie or bust train.
The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.